Hello and good morning. Welcome to Reality Bites with Dr. Kelly. I am Dr. Kelly, and today, as you can see, I have my lovely little therapy dog Turbo with me. So, welcome today. I'm just going to get my notes in the right position here. Give me one sec so that I can see if people are commenting. This is a podcast supporting male survivors of sexual abuse and those who love them. So, moms, wives, you're all welcome, girlfriends. There's no graphic material today, but of course, as always, it is mature subject matter. So, today we are talking about some of my research findings. So, this podcast is meant to bring light to the subject of male survivors of sexual abuse to help you understand it a little bit better. It's going to be very informative today. Just for context, in case there's any new watchers today, as I have mentioned in the past, I was a previous RCMP officer. I was in the ICE unit, Integrated Child Exploitation Unit, where I saw evidence that males were being victimized by sexual abuse. But back then in 2004, there were no reports of this. I wanted to know why, so I decided to make it the subject of my doctoral research. I figured if I wanted to help, I needed to understand the subject more, and I had seen it, so I knew I could make a difference. I figured as a woman, nobody was going to give me too much pushback. So I researched why boys and men were not reporting their abuse, and what I learned was that male sexual abuse impacts male victims across multiple domains, across every area, their entire lifetime, and that the reasons they report might start off as one thing in their youth, but that they morph and change as they grow and mature. Also, that the reasons were very complicated. I'm sorry if he starts to snore. Sounds like he might be falling asleep, and he's not bleeding there. He's got a little lipstick mark on him. I'm not sure. Somebody might have given him a smooch before we started. Anyways, okay. So what I learned, this was early 2004. The only research that looked exclusively at male survivors of sexual abuse came out in the 80s, and it actually said that they didn't think that male sexual abuse was actually that harmful. They were more concerned about male victims turning into perpetrators of domestic violence. But this idea that male sexual abuse isn't harmful is not true. Male sexual abuse is just as impactful, maybe even more so than it is for girls, because there's a lot of differences between male sexual abuse and female sexual abuse. For example, girls and women have a lot of supports. Girls and women are allowed to be victims. They're allowed to need nurturing, whereas traditionally boys and men are not allowed to be victims and there are not a lot of resources for them. So here I am trying to make change in this area to draw light to this. So in the past, boys and men have often feared, because of gender biases and stuff, that if they do disclose, if they do admit that they were victimized, that they will be perceived as weaker or less than a man. And this is a big reason why they stay silent. Male sexual abuse is often perpetrated also by someone that person knows and loved. So this is very confusing for them. This coupled with the gender biases and the things that we see on social media make it very, very confusing for boys. So, as we know, child abuse is most often perpetrated by someone the child knows and loves. 90% of it happens in a trusted relationship. So, an offender will work his way into the victim's environment and then perpetrate acts of abuse, which again is very, very confusing for both genders, but even more so for men, because because of this grooming process, because of the way the offender will sort of make it appear like it's a consensual relationship. They'll establish trust and then eventually abuse the boy after months, weeks, years, they will present it to the boy as if it was a natural progression in the relationship. So when you see, the first contact is almost always done through this grooming process, again, over months, days, sometimes even years. When this grooming process occurs and abuse occurs simultaneously, it does a lot of damage. It creates a lot of confusion in the minds and the hearts of the victim. when abuse is perpetrated by someone the victim already knows. It's the worst kind of betrayal. It's the worst kind of trauma. And again, this confusion that the prior trusting relationship creates a lot of shame, creates a lot of confusion. Confused boys stay silent. Sometimes they feel a lot of shame if they do recognize that it was abuse. Hey, Robert, Dr. Robert Marshall, welcome, welcome. Hey, people, if men especially, if you're a male survivor, you need to be following Dr. Robert Marshall. He's a leader, he's a pioneer in this field. He's running male survivor support groups in the Chicago area and just going out across the country doing good work. So welcome, Robert. So boys and men, if they are old enough to understand, if they're mature enough to understand that what happened was sexual abuse, they feel a lot of shame. They feel foolish. They feel foolish for having trusted their offender before their abuse occurred. They feel foolish or feel shame, embarrassment for not having stopped it sooner, right? So they judge themselves as if they knew then what they know now, as if they were big, strong men back then when they were really just little boys. The way boys cope with this, they deny it, they minimize it, they try to rewrite it as if it was something that they enjoyed. When a victim is abused by someone who they're supposed to be able to trust or in a safe place where they're supposed to be able to be safe, such as in a church, we call it sanctuary abuse. Offenders will often work themselves into environments, churches, schools, these types of environments where they have easy access to children and then abuse a child. When this happens, again, it is really challenging for a male victim because there is usually a previous relationship of trust or adoration. And in this instance, the damage it's immeasurable. The confusion is huge. The male is obviously going to be asking himself, why me? Why did he pick me? Am I weak? Do I have, if it was a male offender, they'll be questioning, do I have a gaydar? Do I send off this vibe that I'm gay? And then, of course, if their bodies respond, which is very common, if their bodies respond with arousal, they question it even more. They think, am I gay? I'm going to do a whole podcast on this in the future, but that is not the case. God made our bodies to respond to touch, and they do. That's not what we're talking about today, but I will do a whole other podcast on this. Other reasons that they don't report, sometimes abuse happens when the boy is very, very young. They don't have words to describe what happened. I had one victim who said it was a female, and she said to her mother, she came home from daycare and said, I don't like the games that we play there, right? Mom just told her to play nice. Parents, if your kids say they don't like the games you're playing, the games they are playing somewhere, you need to ask them, honey, what games are you playing? Why don't you like that? Many children will test the waters of disclosing and get shut down by their parents. For example, one of my friends said his son came home from camp and all of a sudden hated his counselor. Instead of saying, don't use that word hate, it's not nice to hate people, that kind of thing, ask them, honey, what happened? Is there a reason you hate that person now, right? So again, boys will often test the waters of disclosing. And if they get shut down, they don't say anything. And this is we all experience that. Maybe we have our own experiences of, even just, something a lot more, mundane than that. And we'll try to talk to one friend. And if they, get defensive or shut us down, we don't go any farther. The same in our conversation, the same is true for boys, right? Another reason that they don't report, again, this is like a really, really brief, I'm doing 20 minutes here. I have a whole book, this book there, Men to Unspoken Truths About Male Sexual Abuse, where I talk really very detailed. I give examples using my client participants. I tell their stories and lay it out. It's really good to read that book because, you get to see like how it starts, how it gets, kept secret, that kind of thing. That's the whole premise of this book, just trying to draw attention to this. So please pick it up on Amazon if you find what I'm telling you helpful. I'm giving you 20 minutes. There's 5.5 hours on that book. Okay, so another reason that they don't report is sometimes they're not aware it's abuse. For example, if it's happening at home, a child being abused by their own bio parent, it becomes normalized. It becomes their normal. And for you and I, who would never do this to a child or would never, we never harm a child like this, it's really hard to fathom that somebody else would. But honestly, pedophiles have children. That's really hard to believe, but pedophiles will marry even women with children under their age of preference, intending to abuse that child when they become their age of preference. So, it's really complicated. But offenders will work very hard, especially with the grooming process, to make a boy feel that it's just a natural progression in their relationship. So boys stay silent because of this confusion, because offenders will use their arousal, for example, against them as evidence, saying, see, you like this. So when we couple this with all the societal messages that boys and men get about always being willing to have sex, that kind of stuff, again, I'll talk about this in way more detail in another podcast, but this is just reasons that boys stay silent, right? There are offenders telling them, see, you enjoyed this. There are offenders telling them they're old enough to make their own decisions. This is all a very purposeful part, you okay, boo-boo? Part of the grooming process, right? So, boys get messages about how they're always able to protect themselves and how they can always say no to, or say they always want to say yes to sex. And if their body responds, it's very confusing for them. They might be saying, like, I know I was scared, but why did I get aroused? Especially it's really confusing if they actually liked their offender, which most of them do. Offenders will work very, very hard to establish a loving relationship with their victim before their offense occurs, right? So some and other reasons that they stay silent is they're protecting themselves, right? They don't want people to know that this happened to them. They don't want to be treated differently. One of my participants said he didn't want to be pitied, right? I mean, nobody wants to be pitied, so we just have to, I can talk about that in another podcast, how to support a male survivor without pitying them, right? So another reason they stay silent is protecting their sense of family. So, for example, if abuse happens to be, by a bio father, the boy's going to wonder, well, what happens to the family if dad goes to jail? Who's going to pay for groceries? Will we all get split up? All the kids are going to go into different foster homes? We all know that abuse happens in foster care too, right? So they think better to know the abuse at home than to get into get myself or my sisters, lots of male victims will take the abuse hoping to prevent their other siblings from being abused if it's a bio parent. So, they think, better to know the abuse that's happening at home than to break up the whole family and have my sisters be subject to abuse in foster care too. They also worry, like, if the family gets broken up, who's going to pay for college for all of us, right? They just worry about the fact that the consequences could be worse for the family if they get broken up, if dad goes to jail. In situations where it's not a bio family member abusing the child, children often hear their parents complaining, discussing their own stresses, which is natural. You come home and talk about, just your own stresses, and they think, oh my gosh, my parents already have enough on their plate. I can't burden them further, right? So these boys in these instances are doing what boys and men are trained to do. They are protecting their parents. They're being protectors. So they protect their parents from information they think will be too hard for their parents to handle. They don't want to place further burdens on their parents. I have a few examples of this in my book where, one of the parents or one of the other children in the family were sick, and the boys just look at it and go, oh, I can't burden my parents anymore. Another thing that they're doing, again, they're protecting the family reputation. So let's say dad's a police officer or he's the pastor of the church and the abuse happened by one of his colleagues or an elder at the church or something. They don't want dad to look bad for not protecting them, for allowing this to happen, or for this, offender to be in the congregation or amongst the police department, right? These in their young minds, they think they're protecting their dad's reputation, right? They're also protecting the image of the perfect family. For example, another thing that happens is, the victim might look around, if it's in a church, they see all the other elders, all the other parents and adults in the church loving on this offender who has fooled them all. because they will groom their environments too. So the offender has fooled everybody, and they think there's no way that that people are going to believe that I was abused, right? So that's another reason boys stay silent. They also, they think nobody's going to believe me. I don't want to be thought of as a liar, right? So these are very complicated reasons for why boys stay silent. So let's if you put yourself in a male victim, a young boy in his position, right? So he's been abused. He sees that his offender is a very well liked person, and he's trying to figure out how to navigate it, how to disclose it. Maybe he's even tested the waters. Maybe he's tested the waters and got a bad response. Now let's say he's just sitting down with a family to watch TV, and he sees all these messages in the media about real men and about real men never turn down sex, and how media is bombarding with male rape jokes, to be honest, right? Like even Square Bob SpongeBob has a drop the soap joke. Police TV shows are often portraying the police as setting some sort of suspect up to go to jail and be raped. They make light of this. These drop the soap jokes. The male victim looks over and sees dad and mom just roaring with laughter at this, and they think, I can't tell my parents. I don't want to be the brunt of the next joke, right? I couldn't handle this. So, and this kind of thing, it doesn't happen to girls. Nobody laughs at least not in regular society, they're not laughing openly about a female getting raped, right? Traditionally, there has not been room in society for males to be victims. And a lot of males hate that word. They'd rather, I included that in my research. How would you like us to refer to this? And some of them said they prefer the word survivor. So, I try to use that obviously. But you can see it's really complicated for boys and men, right? Abuse does significant damage to not only their emotional stability, the way they think about themselves, their bodies sometimes in some instances, but also it does spiritual damage. So, after abuse, many boys find it difficult to trust the church, difficult to trust God. They might be very angry at God. I mean, it's hard to reconcile. How could this loving God have allowed this to have happened? And, if this is you, know that, God doesn't create evil. Satan creates evil. And I'm going to talk about this in another podcast. I think I'm actually going to broach that subject next week. Unfortunately, for now, what we know is that offenders have free will. But again, many boys question, well, why did God let this happen? Many boys walk away from their faith because of this. And they're often mad sometimes that, the parent that they think should have protected them. So mom or dad, if you have a son or daughter walking around with this like unexplainable, unrelenting chip on their shoulders, or have a newfound hatred for somebody, it's time to be starting to ask those really tough questions. But don't ask in a way that seems to blame them or seems to think they shouldn't have a good reason. This is another reason which I talk about in great detail in this book, in the Men Too book, about when, a parent comes to them and says, if something happened to you, it's probably your fault. That kind of an approach. We can't take that approach when we're trying to inquire, right? So I literally just wrote a whole new book about this subject. I'm just going to raise my camera here. So this book here, Speaking the Truth in Love, a mother's guide to keeping her son safe. Sorry, I forgot the title of my own book. Is coming out in 2 weeks. It's already available on Amazon in digital format, but it'll be available in print format on June 17th. So stay tuned for that. Invite me to be a guest and speak at your conferences if you like. This is my wheelhouse. This is my area of expertise. So abuse is especially damaging or confusing for a male victim if the perpetrator is associated to one of their predominant environments, to their church, to their school, to their parents' circle of influence. It's even more so if they watch everyone else supporting the offender. It's very, very difficult for a boy to believe that he's going to be believed over that very popular offender who has, groomed everybody, worked himself into this environment where everybody likes him. They also stay silent because sometimes there's confusion about their sexuality. Not always, but sometimes there is. You'd be very hard pressed to convince me that someone who is identifying as transgender, for example, does not have a history of abuse. If you're a therapist, if you're a social worker, if you're a counselor, I always say treat the trauma first before you go labeling anybody with any identity like this. See what's left. I'm hearing horror stories about how they, if someone has confusion about their sexuality, they just race them into the hospitals to get, this their surgery and stuff like that, and start treating them as if they're the opposite sex. Treat the trauma first and see what's left. The battle is spiritual. The Bible says the battle is not against flesh and blood, but that principalities of darkness, Ephesians 6:12. So just wanted to, sorry, boo-boo, gonna leave? You out of here? Almost done. Okay, so again, just trying to draw light to this subject that nobody else wants to talk about, or very few other people want to talk about. But, men do want to talk about this too. They just need the freedom. They need safety to know that they're going to be believed, and to know that we aren't going to treat them as if they're less than men if they do disclose. So if you are a man and you're wanting to disclose, if you're wanting to share with your partner, for example, maybe you're getting triggered during intimacy, here's a few ideas on how to do that. You might want to prepare them. So you might want to, you want to tell your spouse, you might want to say, like, I have something I need to tell you. It might be shocking. It might be hard to believe, but it is, causing me problems. Let's pick a time to talk about this. Not right now. I just want you to be aware that there's something I want to tell you. It's going to be hard for me to talk about, you might say. I need you to believe me. You might even say, right now, for now, I don't want you to ask me questions just yet. I'm just telling you. I don't want you to think of me as less than a man, but this is bothering me, so I just need to say it out loud. I need to tell you about this. But you might even say, like, I'm only comfortable telling you a little bit for today. I'll tell you more later when I'm ready to share more. I'm not ready to share the details yet. I just want you to know. You might even say, like, I'm going to talk to my therapist about it first, or I'm going to talk to a therapist about it first. You might even tell them what you need from them. I just need you to, a lot of men have told me that they don't want to be treated any differently. So tell your wife, like, I don't want you to treat me any differently. Don't treat me like I'm a breakable teacup. I'm still a man. I just want you to know, like, I need you to approach a different way, or I need you to just be aware of why I get so angry when we drive down that road. Maybe there's something there that reminds you of abuse, right? Maybe you'll tell them why you haven't brought it up to them sooner. Anyway, that's it for today. So please, if you're a male survivor, I see you. Feel free to reach out. Tell me what you'd like me to talk about. If you're a male survivor, I'm not here to preach the gospel. I'm getting a lot of requests for that. My wheelhouse, I'm talking about male sexual abuse, trying to create awareness. Next week, I am going to be talking about why God allows abuse. So it's a really tough subject, but I'm going to try and take it on because I've had a little bit of teaching about it myself. And again, I know it's a big hindrance for boys and men as far as getting in touch with their own Christian faith. You might be wondering, why doesn't God just take out the offender? And I'm going to do some research this week, and I'm going to take that on. So in the meantime, God bless. Stay safe. If you like this podcast, please share. Please, like I say, comment. I do go back and read all the comments. And, just have a good rest of the week. Take care.